For nearly 2,000 years, one name has been spoken with contempt, with anger, with suspicion, a name that became synonymous with betrayal. Judas, the disciple who handed Jesus over for 30 pieces of silver. The man who kissed the Master on the darkest night in history. The traitor above all traitors. But what if the story you have always heard is not the only version? What if there exists an ancient text claiming that Judas was not the enemy, but the only disciple who truly understood Jesus? What if the betrayal was not betrayal at all? In 1978, in a dry region of Egypt near El-Minya, local farmers discovered something hidden inside a cave. It was not gold, it was not treasure, it was a leather-bound codex written in Coptic, a manuscript that had remained buried for over 1,600 years. That document would later become known as the Gospel of Judas. Before understanding why its publication in 2006 caused global headlines and theological controversy. It is necessary to step back and examine the world in which such a text emerged, because the Gospel of Judas is not simply an alternative story. It belongs to a radically different theological vision that nearly rewrites Christianity from its foundations. To understand it, we must return to the 2nd century. At that time, Christianity was not yet a centralized religion with a fixed New Testament. There was no officially closed canon. Christian communities were scattered across the Roman Empire, each preserving traditions, teachings, and writings that circulated in diverse forms. The 4 canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were widely known, but they were not the only texts in circulation. Other writings were read and discussed in various communities: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Judas. This raises an unavoidable question. If multiple Gospels existed, why were only 4 ultimately recognized as authoritative? The formation of the canon was not instantaneous. It was a gradual process shaped by theological discernment, apostolic tradition, widespread usage, and doctrinal consistency. Early Christian leaders sought texts connected to apostolic witnesses and aligned with what they believed had been faithfully transmitted. Many writings were rejected not necessarily because of political conspiracy, but because they reflected theological perspectives considered incompatible with the emerging Orthodox framework. This is where Gnosticism enters the picture. The Gospel of Judas is deeply Gnostic in character. Gnosticism was not a single unified religion, but a collection of movements sharing certain foundational ideas. One central concept was that the material world was not created by the highest God, but by a lesser, ignorant being often referred to as the demiurge. According to this worldview, the physical universe was flawed. The body was a prison. Salvation did not come through atoning sacrifice, but through secret knowledge, gnosis. In this framework, Jesus did not primarily come to die for the sins of humanity. He came to reveal hidden knowledge to those capable of receiving it. And according to the Gospel of Judas, only one disciple was capable of receiving that revelation. Judas. In the text, Jesus laughs at the other disciples. He mocks their misunderstandings. They worship a lesser God without realizing it. They interpret his mission incorrectly. But Judas is different. Jesus separates him from the others. He reveals cosmic mysteries to him. He speaks of heavenly realms, luminous generations, angelic hierarchies, and the invisible architecture of the universe. At one pivotal moment, Jesus tells Judas something astonishing. You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man who clothes me. This statement is explosive. Within Gnostic theology, the physical body of Jesus is merely a garment, a temporary vessel. The true divine essence must be liberated from material confinement. In order for that liberation to occur, someone must hand over the body. Judas does not betray, Judas obeys. Judas does not sell Jesus. He fulfills a higher mission. Here, the narrative shifts dramatically. In the canonical Gospels, Judas acts out of greed. He is influenced by Satan. He regrets his action. He returns the money. His end is tragic. In the Gospel of Judas, he acts according to revelation. He is not deceived. He is chosen. This generates enormous theological tension. If Judas acted under Jesus' instruction, then the betrayal becomes part of a secret divine plan. But if it was part of the plan, can it truly be called betrayal? And if it was not betrayal, what does that imply about guilt, responsibility, and moral accountability? When the manuscript was authenticated and presented publicly in 2006, it sparked intense debate. Scholars examined its language, its carbon dating, its theological framework. It was determined to be a 2nd century composition, likely translated from an earlier Greek original. This means it was not written by Judas himself. It is not a 1st century eyewitness testimony. It represents a later theological reinterpretation shaped by a specific community. Yet its existence proves something significant. In the early centuries of Christianity, there were groups that viewed Judas entirely differently. That realization alone complicates the assumption that the image of Judas was always uniform and uncontested. Even within the canonical Gospels, Judas' portrayal contains layers of complexity. He is one of the 12. He is chosen by Jesus. He is sent out to preach. He participates in the ministry. Jesus knows from the beginning what Judas will do. This introduces another disturbing question. If Jesus knew Judas would betray him, why did he choose him? Some theologians argue this demonstrates divine sovereignty. Others see it as a mystery of free will and foreknowledge intertwined. The Gospel of Judas offers a third option. He was chosen precisely for that role. The tension between destiny and responsibility becomes central. If everything unfolded according to divine intention, is Judas guilty or instrumental? In the book of Acts, Peter states that Judas fulfilled what was written beforehand. Certain psalms are interpreted as prophetic references to his fate. Even within the canon, there is a dimension of fulfillment. But the canonical texts never absolve Judas of responsibility. The Gospel of Judas does something radically different. It elevates him as the only disciple with true spiritual insight. Not as villain, but as initiate. This inversion is not merely narrative, it is cosmological. If the material world is corrupt and the body is a prison, then the crucifixion ceases to be an atoning sacrifice. It becomes spiritual release. That fundamentally alters Christian theology, and this leads to an even more pressing question. Why were texts like this rejected? Was it institutional suppression or theological incompatibility? 2nd century church leaders, such as Irenaeus of Lyons, wrote extensively against Gnostic movements. He specifically mentions a Gospel of Judas used by certain groups, condemning it as heretical distortion. For him, apostolic faith had to be preserved against esoteric reinterpretations. This reveals a crucial historical reality. Early Christianity was not monolithic. It was a battlefield of competing interpretations about the nature of Christ, creation, and salvation. The New Testament canon did not descend from heaven fully formed. It emerged through centuries of discernment, debate, and doctrinal consolidation. The Gospel of Judas was excluded because its cosmology conflicted with what became Orthodox Christianity. Yet its survival forces us to confront a deeper issue. How stable is our understanding of biblical characters? Is it possible that figures like Judas were interpreted with more fluidity in the earliest centuries than later tradition suggests? The canonical Gospels portray Judas' death differently. Matthew describes his suicide. Acts describes a violent fall. Even within the canon, nuances exist. Judas has always functioned as a symbol of betrayal, guilt, and lost opportunity. But the Gospel of Judas dares to invert that symbol. It transforms the ultimate villain into the only disciple capable of comprehending a cosmic secret. That inversion is deliberate. It is theological provocation. It challenges established authority and reframes the narrative from within an entirely different metaphysical structure. However, accepting that version requires embracing a radically different worldview, one in which the creator of the physical universe is inferior, in which matter itself is flawed, and in which salvation consists of escaping embodiment. This is not a minor reinterpretation. It is a complete reconfiguration. The question is no longer simply whether Judas betrayed Jesus. The deeper question becomes, who was Jesus according to this text? A sacrificial redeemer, or a hidden revealer of secret knowledge? And if the identity of Jesus shifts, what happens to everything else built upon it? At this point, the discussion moves beyond manuscript discovery and enters the realm of existential confrontation. Two visions of reality stand opposed. One in which evil is overcome through incarnation and sacrifice, and another in which material existence itself is the problem, and liberation is escape. At the center of that collision stands the most controversial disciple in Christian history. But there remains an even more unsettling issue embedded within the text itself. What does the Gospel of Judas ultimately say about Judas' own fate? The Gospel of Judas does not end with a simple glorification of the disciple. In fact, the portrayal becomes even more complex, although the text presents Judas as the only one capable of understanding Jesus' hidden revelations. His destiny is not triumphant. There is no public vindication, no restoration of reputation, no earthly reward. There is only a task and isolation. Jesus reveals to Judas a detailed cosmology, luminous realms, divine emanations, angelic orders, and an invisible universe beyond material perception. The physical world is depicted as the flawed creation of lesser beings, ignorant of the highest divine reality. Handing Jesus over is not betrayal, but participation in a necessary cosmic process. Judas enables the separation of divine essence from the physical body. Yet the text contains a striking statement: "You will be cursed by the generations." This declaration is crucial. Even within the Gnostic framework, Judas' role carries consequences. He may possess secret knowledge, but history will remember him as the traitor. His obedience to a hidden command does not spare him from condemnation in the visible world. This introduces a tragic dimension. Judas becomes the disciple who understands, and the disciple who will be hated. He carries out a divinely revealed mission, but it condemns him to infamy. There is something profoundly unsettling about that image. If Judas acts out of obedience to revelation, he sacrifices not only Jesus' body, but his own legacy. He becomes the villain so that a higher spiritual reality may be revealed. However, even here, the narrative is not entirely straightforward. Some scholars argue that the Gospel of Judas does not fully exalt him. Certain passages suggest ambiguity. He is associated with a specific generation, and interpretations vary as to whether that generation is superior or flawed. The symbolism is layered and not always transparent. This reminds us of something essential. The Judas in this text is not a historical reconstruction. He is a theological figure shaped to embody a specific worldview. He functions as a symbol within a cosmology, and that forces a distinction. Are we discussing the historical Judas who lived in the 1st century, or the theological Judas reimagined by a 2nd century Gnostic community? Historically speaking, the Gospel of Judas does not provide new biographical data about the real individual. It reflects the beliefs of a group seeking to reinterpret the story of Jesus through a dualistic lens. Yet the power of that reinterpretation is undeniable. By reversing the moral polarity of Judas, the text compels us to reconsider how narratives are constructed. In the canonical Gospels, Judas' betrayal sets in motion the arrest, trial, and crucifixion. His act is morally condemned, yet it also fulfills Scripture. There is tension, divine foreknowledge, and human responsibility coexist. The Gospel of Judas resolves that tension differently. The crucifixion is not primarily an atoning sacrifice reconciling humanity to God. It is a release from material confinement. The physical body is not the locus of redemption, but the obstacle to transcendence. That shift alters the entire theological framework. If the cross is not redemptive in the traditional sense, then sin, forgiveness, and covenant are redefined. The drama becomes metaphysical rather than moral. This is why the conflict surrounding the text is so significant. It is not merely about rehabilitating a misunderstood disciple. It is about redefining the nature of salvation. Why then did the broader Christian movement reject such interpretations? Because they contradicted the core proclamation transmitted through apostolic communities that the Word became flesh. That creation is fundamentally good, though fallen, and that redemption occurs within history, not by escaping it. Gnostic cosmology undermines that affirmation by portraying material existence as inherently defective. The stakes could not be higher. The question is not simply whether Judas was good or evil. It is whether matter itself is evil. Within Orthodox Christianity, Judas represents the tragedy of freedom misused. He walks with Jesus, hears his teachings, witnesses miracles, yet chooses betrayal. His story warns of proximity without loyalty. Within the Gnostic reinterpretation, Judas represents insight misunderstood by the majority. He acts with knowledge others lack, yet suffers condemnation. Two radically different anthropologies emerge. In one, moral agency is real, and accountability matters eternally. In the other, ignorance is the true enemy, and enlightenment is salvation. Even in the canonical account, Jesus declares, "Woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for him if he had not been born." That statement implies moral gravity. The Gospel of Judas removes that warning and replaces it with initiation. One narrative presents betrayal as sin. The other presents it as cosmic necessity. These frameworks cannot be harmonized without reshaping fundamental doctrines. And yet, the existence of the Gospel of Judas remains historically valuable. It demonstrates that early Christianity was not uniform. It was a contested environment in which communities wrestled with the identity of Jesus and the meaning of his death. The canon emerged through conflict, not isolation. Recognizing that complexity does not invalidate orthodox belief, but it does enrich our understanding. The figure of Judas has endured precisely because he embodies paradox. He is inside and yet outside, chosen and condemned, necessary and guilty. Without Judas, there is no arrest. Without arrest, no crucifixion. Without crucifixion, no resurrection. That does not make him righteous, but it does make him central. Perhaps the enduring fascination with Judas lies not in whether he was secretly a hero, but in what his story reveals about freedom and foreknowledge. If Jesus knew what would happen, does that eliminate responsibility? If prophecy foretold the betrayer, does that excuse the betrayer? These questions extend beyond theology into philosophy. They touch the nature of causality, destiny, and moral agency. The Gospel of Judas pushes those questions toward determinism shaped by cosmic hierarchy. The canonical Gospels preserve tension without dissolving accountability. In the end, the debate surrounding Judas forces a more profound confrontation. Who is Jesus? If he is the incarnate Son who enters history to redeem creation, then betrayal is a moral rupture and the cross is redemptive sacrifice. If he is primarily a revealer of hidden knowledge seeking escape from materiality, then the betrayal becomes liberation. Two visions, two theological systems, one name at the center. Judas, the disciple who betrayed, or the man who believed he understood a mystery too great for the others. The Gospel of Judas does not overturn Christianity, but it exposes the fragile line between interpretation and transformation. It reminds us that the earliest centuries of Christian thought were shaped by struggle, debate, and decisive choices. And in that struggle, the image of one man became the symbol of a larger question. Is salvation achieved through sacrificial love within history, or through secret knowledge that transcends it? The answer to that question determines not only how we see Judas, but how we understand the very foundation of the Christian story.